Hi everyone. Today I would like to welcome Li Haoyi, who is a staff software engineer at Databricks, the company behind Spark. Haoyi is most well known for his open source contribution. He wrote so many libraries and tools that he created his own ecosystem, the Li Haoyi ecosystem. And it includes stuff like the meal build tool, the Ammonite REPL, and countless of libraries like FastParse, OSLib, and so on. Additionally, Howie wrote a book, Hands-on Scala Programming, which is amazing for beginners. It focuses into simple Scala and how to get things done. So please welcome Howie. So today I would like to start this interview with a question that I think many people have. So you're working on tons of open source libraries and tools. When do you work on this? Do you do this on your spare time, or do you do it in your work, or both? So how does it work?
Yeah, basically all the work I do open source is totally separate from the work I do professionally at Databricks. We use some of the libraries at work, but I don't work on the libraries at work. I don't use work hours, work laptops, work colleagues. I even have an exclusion in my contract that says I can work on this, just to make it crystal clear that these are separate from my professional duties. Many of them aren't actually that much work to maintain. So these standards of like HTTP or JSON don't change particularly quickly, right?
Yeah, fair
So
enough.
you can write the same Scala tags logic rendering some HTML 10 years ago as you can today, and the browser will render it the same way without issue. So like many of these libraries actually have sat for years without any changes, and they work more or less just fine. I guess
But
I'm not the
stuff
only
like
one working on this. So yeah, go ahead, Julian.
Yeah, I was saying like, stuff like toolings, for example, like a meal or like a build tool or Ammonite, they may need to have like more updates or do you think is more
Yeah, so those are definitely more effortful. And for those, I'm lucky I have a lot of people helping. So not just contributors, but also maintainers. So Tobias, Lorenzo, Alex, Archambault help out a lot from Mill and Ammonite and other projects, as well as helping update for Scala 3 and things like that. So it's not just about me. And I guess if anyone else wants a commit bid, I'm happy to give away commit access to whoever wants to step up and contribute.
Yeah, it's great that you managed to get like maintainers. It's always like the difficult part about like open source to get other people commit and keep coming to the project.
Mhm.
Could you like Scala comes in different flavors. You can have Java++, you can have like monadic functional style like Zio type level, or you can have like the reactive manifesto with Akka. So how would you describe the flavor of your like ecosystem? What are the principles behind it?
So the one line selling point of the Li Haoyi ecosystem is that it's executable pseudocode that's easy, boring, and fast.
Okay.
So it's a kind of code that you write on a whiteboard during an interview when your first year student is learning some concept. They can write it. You can write it in a REPL when you need to do something interactive. And someday that throwaway one-line REPL snippet might grow to be a script, might grow to be a toy project, might grow to be a production code base that a team works on and like maintains with thousands or tens of thousands or millions of users. And you shouldn't need to like prototype in Python, productionize in Java. Scala should be able to take you all the way. Like that's what makes Scala a scalable language. That's even in the name. Um, yeah, so I can't speak for everyone, but when I learned Scala in 2010 or so, I had a hell of a time. It was really hard. Like I
Yeah.
loved the language, but everything else was awful. So the docs are trying to impress you rather than teach you. I got scolded on mailing list because the official AWS client was blocking and not async. There are people constantly online telling me how my code sucked because I didn't use their favorite FT library. Yeah, and I tried to pickle a map of strings and it would hang the compiler. Like there's map of string to string. Bang, compiler stops working. So lots of cool stuff, but like actually doing anything was really hard. I was just trying to make a student project for school and it had very much difficulty. So like this ecosystem of commonly tools and libraries is basically everything that the Scala ecosystem and community back then was not. Like
I see.
every project will need HTTP or serialization or command line or file system. And the commonly Haoyi ecosystem gives these to you with decent performance, good documentation, boring, predictable behavior. So we're not trying to impress you how clever we are. We are just trying to give you something to get your work done and get out of your way. That's what this ecosystem is about.
And I guess one of the important things is that you want people to be able to start working on it like without needing like a lot of spending lots of time on documentation, or it should be quite easy to pick up in generally, right?
Yeah. So I mean, these libraries probably have the best documentation of almost any of the Scala ecosystem. Like the docs to test to code is almost one to one to one. There's like literally 50 pages of docs for even a small library. But if we did our job right, you should not need to constantly go back to these 50 pages of docs. Like
Yeah.
you make a HTTP request and you're passing some data. Well, there's a data parameter. You say data equals whatever data you pass in and it works. You want to serialize some JSON with some indentation. Well, you say indent equals 1, 2, 3, 4, and it indents it for you. It should be guessable, and you should be able to guess correctly. And you shouldn't need to learn about deep theory or deep architecture in order to use these tools.
Yeah, so it's potentially great for beginners, people who just are starting Scala and they want to get something working. You think the Li Haoyi ecosystem is just like a great things to pick up because they will be able to be productive quite fast.
Yeah, and I think that's important because today's beginners are tomorrow's main workforce and day after tomorrow's experts who are community leaders in driving the ecosystem forward. So if we don't focus on beginners, someday all the senior folks are going to retire and that's the end of the community. We need the beginners constantly coming in and they need to have a good experience. So that's why I put this together, these libraries.
Yeah, and I think also like many companies, sometimes who are big users of Scala, sometimes they complain that they struggle to hire people, partly because the library choices that they made may be too complicated, and so they struggle really to find people for these too complicated libraries. But if something is like fairly simple and easy to understand for people from other languages, it's probably easier to hire in that case, I guess.
Yeah. So I don't know. There was like a thread recently on people like giving up on Scala on Reddit, and there's just so much of people who got over-invested in things that don't matter and ends up burning them. Like people who did not need reactive actors in order to make their simple like CRUD website, and then they end up regretting and having problems hiring. Or people who did not actually need your high-tech IO monad Casely interpreters, but they use it and then they wonder like, oh no, like 2 years down the road, the guy who wrote it left, and now even if I hire a senior guy who has 20 years experience working in Java, he's going to have a hell of a time picking this stuff up.
Yeah.
So like those things have their use cases, but I don't think their use cases are the entire Scala community. Like some people can use it, the people who love it, great. But there's also a huge number of people who do not want to be using reactive actors. They're making one query per second, one request per second to the internal website.
Don't care.
You have people who are banging out quick scripts. They don't need like super strict like functional programming. They just need something that's better than Bash. And for all these people, that's something that I hope to provide an alternative to, not the people who currently are very happy with these more advanced techniques and frameworks.
Yeah, I think it's probably a problem we have generally in the entire industry. I think it's like for microservices, people got burned by using like microservices when they didn't need to. Or like we tend to sometimes use fancy tech, not because we need it, but maybe because we're bored or we want to try something new, or, maybe you want to develop your CV with these fancy keywords. I don't know. Okay.
Yeah,
But
I
it's
agree.
true.
But I think Scala in particular has particular problems. Like
Yeah.
most other communities don't get stuck for 10 years on the same obscure tech. They'll get stuck for 1 year or 3 years and then they'll move on. Whereas I feel Scala maybe the community has focused too much on these things that are cool, but maybe aren't the only things that matter.
Yeah, I think in my opinion, maybe one of the issues in Scala is that it's extremely powerful, and so you can do a lot of things, and you can make it in different ways. So I think people experiment, which is great to experiment, but like it's also like I think it's where it's important to have someone senior in the team, someone who has been burned by this over experimentation, and kind of tell the team like look, let's pick up something simple that works, and let's focus on the work and the features we want to develop more than the fancy tech, I guess.
Yeah, and maybe just even at like broader, we need people in the community who have been burned, but not burned so badly that they run away to write Go or Kotlin. You keep the community to stand up for this and say, hey, this is Scala, we love Scala, but we can't just be about IO monads and reactive actors. We need to be more than that. We need the people designing chips in Scala, like the RISC-V people. We need the people doing kind of Java-like code in Scala because they contribute a lot to community. Like the guys at Morgan Stanley doing cool things with Optimus platform falls nowhere in the existing system, in the existing Scala like taxonomy, but it's really cool work.
Yeah.
So we need to be a big tent to like accept all of this and even like advocate for all of this. It's not just about our one or two favorite frameworks or favorite abstractions.
That's fair enough. And one thing I want to do with this podcast is that I actually want to make people discover all these different use cases of Scala. Like we had David Smith a couple of weeks ago. We did the game development in Scala JS. There is actually a company doing like chip development in Scala. There is like it's quite a varied ecosystem. So I would like to try people to discover all these things and make it put them on the spotlight a little bit. So to come back a bit to your ecosystem, so if you had to pick like one tool or one library that you either you prefer or something that you think is like probably the most impactful stuff that you produce, so what will it be?
I think
Would
right
it be
now the thing to pick would be Mill, the build tool.
yeah,
So like, one thing about the Li Haoyi ecosystem is that you don't need to buy into all of it. You can use Mill to build your functional programming projects. You can use Mill to build your Akka actor projects. You can use Mill to build your. I noticed that recently the RISC-V Chisel people are using Mill to build their hardware designs for making
yeah,
chips. So, but the thing about Mill is that what it replaces, SBT, which is SBT, it's such a big like bugbear in the Scala community. Like, yeah, you can kind of get used to it, but no one really likes it, and it turns so many people off.
yeah,
Like I work at Databricks. I'm one of the few experts at SBT in Databricks, which is like 1,000-person company all writing Scala, and nobody. And I don't know SBT. I'm not good at SBT. I'm the best guy there is. It's just really hard to make SBT do what you want. Um, so that Mill is like a real chance to break past that, where every team ends up struggling with the build tool when what they want to be doing is struggling with their customers or struggling with the application or struggling with the business logic. Mill is super intuitive. Like people love using Mill for some reason, and you really have to try it to find out why. Like people complain about SBT or Gradle or Bazel, but people generally don't complain about Mill. Like they love configuring their build. Just think about that. Like who loves configuring Maven or Ant? But they love
no one.
configuring Mill. It's just that nice. Yeah.
That's amazing. And so on top of the like nice interface, is there any difference in terms of performance comparing to SBT or the build tool? I mean, one of the things people always complain in Scala is the compile time, or maybe the loading time of SBT, which is takes quite a lot of time. So how is it with Mill?
So Mill can't speed up the Scala compiler for you, but
Yeah,
it does speed up everything else. So it has very aggressive kind of multi-layer caching at every single level. It will cache the class files, it will cache the JVM, it will cache the class loaders within the JVM, it will cache objects within the class loaders. And in general, like you see in a large SPT project with, let's say, 100 modules, that's a rather large project, you may find that, oh, your loading times may take 2 or 3 minutes. Large mill projects with hundreds of modules is instant, just like that. Not because it's doing anything magic. It's like how big is 100 modules? You can deal with 100 modules in any programming language easily, right? In 100 objects, but this mill doesn't manages to do all the caching and other things intelligently enough that it's not redoing work every time that you want to do something. For example, uh, SBT loves re-resolving your Maven dependencies. I don't know why. I think many people can't figure out why. Like you already resolved them once, it's not going to change. It's not like someone's going to remove something from Maven Central tomorrow. You can't even delete things from Maven Central. But SBT loves re-resolving them. Mill doesn't. Mill resolves it once, and unless you make some changes, it's going to use the same JSON file you have on disk. Here's my resolution. Um, so that's and the same even applies to custom logic, right? Like SBT, you write a code generator, it's going to regenerate the code every time you hit compile, every single time. And if that code generator is small, that's not a big deal. The code generator gets complicated, maybe generating binary files, maybe generating Docker containers, that gets really expensive.
yeah.
Mill doesn't. Mill caches it by default. The simple thing to do in Mill, you get all the benefits from caching and so on. And even though we cannot speed up the Scala compiler, it does its best to speed up everything else and cache it as aggressively as possible.
That's great to hear. And I think one thing I've watched one of your presentation where you were saying that one thing with Mill is that the basic features, the things most people want to do, is built in. So it's kind of comes battery included in a sense. Like while SBT, which has an amazing set of plugins, there is a plugin for everything in SBT, but by default it doesn't necessarily come with all the things people do in like uploading like packaging a jar or making like a fat jar, publishing it somewhere. It's not doesn't necessarily come out of the box.
Yeah, that's true. Mill comes with maybe 99% of what you need. It doesn't. The last 1% you have to do yourself. But SBT comes in maybe 50% of what you need. And like, oh no, I actually need to deploy my code somewhere. How do I do it? SBT can't help you. You need a plugin. I need to upload my code to Maven Central. I need 3 plugins. I need assembly jar. I need a plugin with all sorts of special configuration. Mill, like, it's not that hard to put jars together into a bigger jar, like, frankly.
No.
And it's not that hard to like make a few JSON requests to Maven Central and upload a jar file there and some XML files. Like, this stuff isn't rocket science, and there's no reason you need some like distributed ownership with large community collaboration in order to package an assembly jar and upload some files to Maven Central. So for Mill, we just do it for you. It changes once every like 5 years when Maven Central changes some API. But otherwise, it's there and it works, and you just use it, and it's great. Yeah, so SBT definitely has more plugins, but whether the more plugins actually allow you to do more things is it's in my opinion, a big question mark. That's not at all clear to me.
Yeah, I think it definitely makes sense to come battery included. I mean, people don't necessarily want to fiddle endlessly with their build. I mean, I think people are really little patient with build. Like, people want to code, want to deploy an application, but the build is more like, I just want it to work. I don't necessarily want to spend lots of time customizing it. So I think if it comes with the thing that you need most of the time, that's great.
Yeah. We still have some Mill plugins that are maybe not out of the box. Like, if you want MIMA backwards compatibility binary compat checking, that someone else maintains it. But then for most things, you can get by just with what Mill comes bundled. Like, what do? You write code, you compile your code, and you deploy your code somewhere, right? That's what you do. And Mill just provides those things by default. And if you do something special, Mill also makes it really easy for you to write custom logic, like super, super easy. Just literally a Scala function. And that's your custom logic, and you get all the caching and things for free. So even if there's not a plugin for something, you can always do it yourself, and it's not terribly difficult.
Yeah, and it's still possible to write a plugin for Mill. Like, let's say you're an organization, you have some custom things for your organization, you can still write a plugin for this and then reuse it internally, right?
That's right. Yeah. And maybe one thing that's interesting is it's really easy to write a plugin like internally as well. Like, you don't even need to publish it. Just in Mill, a plugin is literally a Scala trait that you extend and you override things if necessary. So there's no special like plugin framework. It's like, yeah, we pull things off Maven Central. It gives you a trait, you extend the trait, end of story. Like, it's just normal Scala stuff. Which
you mean it's like a normal library? There is no difference between a Scala library and a Mill plugin. It's the same thing.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense.
Like, obviously, we'll use Mill classes and Mill types and Mill, some of the Mill dependencies, but there's nothing like structurally different. It's literally the same library pull off Maven Central. It just provides something that inherits from Mill.module or somehow similar to that.
And so, what do you recommend for people if they want to try Mill? Because this is something where I always think people. I mean, it's painful to touch your build. Once it's work, you kind of don't want to touch it because it was so painful to arrive there. Is there a way to kind of take your SBT build and convert it into Mill, or if not completely automatically, do it partially?
The most success I've had here is using ChatGPT. ChatGPT actually does understand build tools quite well, but in terms of anything more like principle, like having some automated analysis, that doesn't really exist right now. And that's just because like Mill and SBT's data models are so different that the thing that you don't understand with SBT is exactly what's incompatible with the thing that you would understand in Mill. So trying to like automatically map from one to the other is very difficult.
And is it possible to keep the same project structure but just change the build? Like, so potentially, if you just want to experiment with Mill but without like screwing up all your code base, can you just essentially comment out your build.sbt, you do your Mill build and keep everything the same?
Yes, that is possible.
Oh, that's good.
Mill provides some built-in like functionality to just emulate SBT project structure, and it works. I see some projects using it. I think Chisel, for example, maintain both SBT and Mill builds, and they seem to be pretty happy. Maintaining 2 build files definitely sucks, but then if you like Mill, then you end up maintaining one, and if you don't like Mill, you go back to SBT, also end up maintaining one. So it's really just a transitional thing.
I think it's not so much about maintaining 2, but more like to have a smooth migration, because if let's say if you have a lot of custom logic, you may want to like start maybe with one module, or like just try a little bit and don't necessarily break everything, like or potentially be able to roll back if something doesn't work. So I think it's very good that you're able to do it in parallel. Nice. Maybe I will give it a shot at my work.
Yeah, you should. It's very nice.
Cool. And so to come back a bit to the Li Haoyi ecosystem, so recently I've heard quite a few people telling me that they start to use your libraries because they started to use Scala for scripting with Scala CLI. Have you heard, like, do you have like a similar feedback on your side? Like, do you have a feeling that your libraries got more popular with Scala CLI?
No, no one talks to
No.
me about them.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
I don't hear much. So
so you, and do
it's
you
good
use
that they
Scala
do.
CLI yourself? Because I guess it's a bit like Mill, but you can do less. Like it's only one module.
I haven't. Yeah. I might at some point. So if I have not found the need to, it looks great. If Scala CLI existed 10 years ago, I might not have created MN scripts as a tool. I don't agree with every design choice they made in Scala CLI, but it's more or less in the right direction. Like it's tries to make Scala easy rather than trying to make it like principled or powerful or flexible or whatever. And like, yeah, they may have to take some shortcuts or cut some corners, but that's totally fine. Like people can always upgrade to a real build tool or real system later on.
Yeah, one thing I noticed in Scala, what I found like annoying when I was teaching, is that when you want people to install, like let's say, like to download a Git repository with a Scala code base and make it run, it's, if you have 10 people in the room, most likely at least one, it's not going to work. There's going to be an install issue, either the JVM, the Scala library, the compiler, the IntelliJ version. It's like you feel like there is no like kind of snapshot, or it's very difficult to reproduce a setup. Like at least it was like 2 or 3 years ago when I was doing this. And I have the impression with
Yeah.
Scala
So
CLI and maybe Mill, like it brings a bit more reproducibility to this issue.
yeah, Mill provides these really nice bootstrap scripts. So you for the bootstrap scripts, all you need is a JVM installed. And Mill is pretty flexible, so any JVM in the last 10 years will probably work. You have this bootstrap script is like 100 lines of code, and it will do the necessary downloading, installing, and bootstrapping and caching. So then so that you basically go from nothing to everything working in one command, just /mil, rather than having to install mil globally. And in
Hmm.
future commands, a /mil is instant because everything's already cached. Like I mentioned, we cache aggressively. So that's something that I think Mill does well. SBT, I'm not sure whether they have a similar thing right now. I know people do similar things in Gradle, for example. You often see Gradle W files in JVM projects. Similar idea. I think Scala CLI is also a great step forward in just reducing the number of moving parts. Like if you're a
Yeah,
student, right, you don't want a huge build tool with like infinite depth and complexity. You want something that compiles your one Scala file, maybe two Scala files if you're the valedictorian.
nice. And in terms of major Scala versions, so which one are you using both on your open source and maybe on your work? Are you more like focusing on Scala 2 or Scala 3 or both?
It's all Scala 2.
Scala 2.
My open source is mostly Scala 2.13. Work
Mm-hmm.
is Scala 2.12, but we're trying to get onto 2.13. As you'd imagine, a multi-million line code base is also moving very quickly. Trying to migrate a major Scala version takes a while, but we'll get there. Yeah, and I guess also this depends on what point in life I'm at. Like in 2013, I would have the pre-release Scala JS compiler, pre-release Scala compiler. I'd use K2.0 beta. You'd be learning about enumeraties or something just to make a stupid CRUD website. And yeah, I was perfectly happy with that at the time. But then, like by late 2010s, early 2020s, I'm a bit older and less energetic, and I'm happy to let someone else deal with all the bugs in the pre-release Scala 3 compiler, or even the post-release Scala 3 compiler. I let other people sort out the teething issues. And even
Yeah.
now in 2024, I haven't really started using Scala 3 myself yet. IntelliJ is simply not ready. I hope it'll be ready soon. It's not ready now. And if I have to choose between giving up like white space indentation syntax or giving up IntelliJ, I give up indentation syntax. IntelliJ is just too valuable for me to give up.
Yeah,
So
no,
for the other people who are willing to do this, like the ecosystem already supports Scala 3, largely due to not myself. Like other people have ported Li Haoyi libraries all to Scala 3. So those guys, whoever wants to use them, can use them in Scala 3. But for me, I'm taking my time. I'm in no hurry. Someday I
yeah,
will update.
yeah, you let other people do like go through the pain, and you will come when everything is settled.
Yeah, or when they get stuck and they need my expertise. Like updating, I think like fast parse needed my expertise. Other people made 80% of the way, but I just came in to do the last 20% and make the thing land.
Yeah, because I think the main difference, especially when you're a library author, is like the macros. Like if your code were using macros, it's kind of difficult to refactor. I mean, it's completely different. But otherwise,
Yes, you
like the
need to
main
implement the whole
logic,
thing twice.
yeah. But otherwise, the main logic hasn't changed much. Like I mean, like you can take the Scala 2 version and move it to Scala 3. It should work most of the time. Like
Yeah, that's it. I mean, there's some finickiness like, oh, you have to put parens around your function, the lambda arguments now. Oh, you can't, you have to put explicit like type annotations for implicit. But those aren't a big deal. Those are easy. It's mostly the macros and rewriting all your macros in the new system without IDE support because IDE is broken is very hard.
yeah.
Like it's like the worst experience I've ever had programming ever. It's just terrible. So
And I think
I don't
generally
know how other
macros
people do it,
and macros
but
never been the most documented feature of Scala. Like especially I remember in
yeah, and
Scala
they're
2,
worse
like
documented in Scala 3 than in Scala 2. So like in Scala 2, you had Eugene Bermacco and Dennis Shebler, and actually did a very good job documenting what the macros allow you to do. Scala
mhm.
3, we don't have such a good like documentation like experience. Yeah. So and also in Scala 2, when Scala 2 first came out, the idea was already working well enough for you to use it for macros. Scala 3, even in 2024, I have an open ticket on IntelliJ with like one file with 6 different things that don't work. It's like, yeah, well, like I guess they'll fix it at some point. Until then, I'll let other people deal with it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no, I understand. And so you said that all your libraries are like Scala 3 compatible. What about Mill? Because you write your Mill build
Yeah.
in Scala. So can you use Scala 3 in your Mill build or?
Mill's not. It's the only one left.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Maybe sometime this year or next year, depending how the Scala 3 shapes up. Yeah, like
Yeah.
we want to get there. It's just a matter of timing, really.
So like you're potentially looking for open source people to contribute to Mill. It's one
Yeah.
thing they can do.
Yeah. Mill doesn't have that many macros. Like if I say how many macros it has, it's on the order of like 150 lines of code.
Hmm.
So it shouldn't be that hard to rewrite in theory, but you would need someone who has some expertise in Scala 3 macros, which are, in my opinion, extremely hard to use.
Oh, you find them
So
hard to use?
I find them harder to use, not because the code is bad, but because the tooling around it, in particular IntelliJ, doesn't work well, and the documentation is extremely poor.
I see.
Like I would say you probably want maybe 1 to 2 orders of magnitude more documentation before I'd say it's comfortable. And Scala 2 macros did have a lot more documentation than Scala 3 macros did. For example, Scala 2 quasi-quotes had a whole page of here's all the different things you can do in quasi-quotes, just like one after the other. So like you read the whole thing, it's like, okay, I understand what I can do. Scala 3 will have 2 examples and some paragraphs of text. And okay, good luck. Like
Yeah.
what doesn't work, what the limitations, like you have to find it out yourself. So I don't think it's there yet. The code itself for Scala 3 is a lot better. Like the abstractions are better, the frameworks are better, but everything around the code is worse. And code is not the only thing that matters. Like
Yeah, I see.
so,
Yeah,
that's why I'm still using Scala 2.
my experience, because I never really coded macro myself. I'm more like do like code review with macros, and I have the impression that in Scala 3, the code is of macros is much more readable. Like you understand better what it's doing if you're not an expert. But that's probably
It
true.
is,
Like
yeah.
I never really checked the documentation for it. So
Yeah, the code is better. You don't need to juggle like owners. You don't need to go and assign types yourself. Like the programming model is just better. But it's let down by the docs and tooling. So I don't know what the solution there is. Yeah.
well, I think this can always be improved. Like if the fundamental, I mean, I think it's probably good that the fundamentals of the macros is more healthy and easier to more
Hmm.
readable. And then I guess I guess nobody really wants to write documentation, but it's something that can be done like
Yeah.
afterward.
Yeah. I honestly look at how much complexities in Scala 3 macros. Having a 400-page book documenting them would not be unreasonable. Like there's a lot of stuff in there. It's all new. No one knows anything about them. 10 pages, 15 pages, 50 pages, nowhere near enough. Like there's just so much stuff in there that you're trying to teach people how to use that your standard, like, here's how here's a few examples, just doesn't cut it. And there's also the migration and change management, right? Like given people aren't writing Scala 3 macros in a vacuum, they are writing Scala 3 macros to try and do something that they already did in Scala 2.
Yeah,
So you don't just need docs about Scala 3 macros, you need docs about for what
like
people
translating.
have typically done in Scala 2, how do
Yeah.
you do the same thing in Scala 3? Where are the limitations, differences, things are the same? And that's would be a lot of work, but without that work, I feel it's really will fall short of its potential. Just because it doesn't matter how nice your code is, if only Martin Ersky and the guys at EPFL know how to write them, it's not going to go anywhere.
And I guess it's probably slowing down the migration to Scala 3 because I think like one of the reason people like some libraries haven't migrated to Scala 3 for this reason. And so people don't migrate to Scala 3 because they depend on on library using only Scala 2. So it's like even though like
Yeah,
not many people use macro, it's a bottleneck a bit like because libraries do
yeah,
use it and people use library.
yeah. So here we are, like 4 years past release of Scala 3. I think we are more or less getting community 50-50 between 2.12, 2.13 and 3 dot something. I'm not sure 3 dot what. But yeah, it definitely slows things down. And what we need now is to just finish the migration. We don't need more like Scala 3 to push forward while everyone else is still stuck on 2.12. Like at
Yeah.
some point, if you push too forward too far, people are just going to give up and move to Kotlin instead of Scala 3 dot something, just because they're so far behind and they don't see a way of catching up.
Yeah, I think we definitely need more effort to migrate most of the community to Scala 3. I mean, there will always be people like staying in Scala 2, but I think it would be nice if most of the community migrate to Scala 3 because, one tool, only one tool, one set of documentation, like look, all the courses like this. I mean, it's always tricky to duplicate. I mean, even though
Yeah,
Scala 2 and Scala 3 are not that different, like it's still like still a pain.
yeah. And like people talk about Python migration, and I think the Scala 2 to 3 is actually very similar. Like Python migrates Python 2 to Python 3, 4 years past the release of Python 3, you still couldn't really say Python 3 was really better than Python 2 yet, and people weren't fully migrated. And I think it's actually quite a similar state where Scala 3 is now. If I had to choose something and I realize my ID doesn't work, I'm not going to choose Scala 3 for all its other benefits. Or if the documentation for all the new features doesn't work, or if the way the new features are added is not stable, that does not give me a sense of stability and maturity. There's actually a lot of reasons why I would still use Scala 2 in early 2024, despite Scala 3 being released in 2021. So I don't think I'm the only one like that. Like,
No.
I'm sure there's a lot of startups and other kind of more cutting edge folks who are willing to take the risk and ride the wave. But I'm sure there's a lot of people who just want the damn thing to work.
Yeah,
And in
but I
Scala
do
3, I
think that
don't think we're there yet. Yeah.
I do think that it's going in the right direction. Like I see like lots of like for example they released like Scala 3.4 recently, and I've seen some like a flag you can use to automatically migrate your code. Like so, I do think that they're trying at least to make the migration smoother. I'm not sure we are there yet, but I think it's going. At least there is like effort going in that direction there.
Yeah.
So that's nice. So maybe let's change a little bit the subject and go back a bit to your like professional life. So you work at Databricks for quite a few years now. Could
Mhm.
you like tell me a bit like what are your responsibilities there? Like what do you do?
Yeah. So I've been here 7 years. I work on the internal developer platform. So things like our build system, our language tooling, our cloud dev environments, our auto-scaling CI, elastic CI system, multi-cloud end-to-end testing environments. So it's actually quite a lot of different stuff. And the company's grown a lot since I joined. There was like 300 people. Now it's like a few thousand people. So my
Mhm.
work has gone from IC to lead to manager back to IC. And it's just whatever we can make it work, given that I'm 16 time zones away from HQ. So that's always a challenge. Not everything can work. Some things can work, but not by me. Sometimes other people have to do stuff just because I'm in the wrong time to play and place to do it. And yeah, the career isn't quite the straight ladder you may see in other companies where people just like climb up. It's always a struggle trying to make it work remotely. But
Yeah,
it's been a good experience. I never would have imagined like how much variety of stuff there is to do. Like I actually had to implement I actually had to implement a programming language, like for real, in order to do real work because people needed it. I needed to implement cloud like multi-cloud infrastructure. I needed to make auto scaling like elastic distributed systems with like running tens of thousands of cores, scaling up from 0 to max at 5 p.m. on West Coast US and scaling down to 0 after everyone goes home. And I've done all that basically on the same team, which is quite a great experience. I don't think I would have gotten anywhere else. Now, if you're curious, I have a bunch of blog posts on the Databricks engineering blog. If you go to Databricks engineering blog and search for Li Haoyi, you'll see some of the work I do related to Scala, related to infrastructure, related to all sorts of things.
Yeah, I'll post a link below below this video. Definitely, you're reading. I mean, one thing I really appreciate about your work is like your quality of technical writing. It's very, very interesting, and I think many people like share this same impression. So keep doing it, because really, it's nice to share
Thanks.
your experience, and also like the way you see things, the way you program, and I think many people can learn a lot from this. And so Databricks, if I'm correctly, so they were the one who created Spark, right? And
yes.
And what are the other products that are in Databricks? Because this Spark is the main thing that I know.
Yeah, so Databricks provides notebooks, like online notebooks.
Like
Databricks
Zeppelin or
provides,
stuff like this.
yeah, Zeppelin, but better.
Okay, nice.
Yeah. Um, Databricks provides these kind of what they call scheduled jobs or workflows. So it's not just running a Spark job now, but you can kind of orchestrate multiple jobs, kind of similar to Airflow, but
Mhm.
with a lot of optimizations, particular to Spark. Databricks provides the Delta Lake, which is a transactional big data store. So, you know how using a database like MySQL or Postgres is generally a lot safer than using just writing files to disk, because when things go wrong, having a database gives you rollbacks, point
Mhm.
in time checkouts, and so on. So Databricks Delta Lake does that for big data stores. Like if you was just scribbling blobs on S3, you have all the same problems you have scribbling files on disk. What if you scribble it halfway and it fails? What if it gets corrupted? What if it gets rejected because of some validation later? You need to roll back. The Databricks Delta provides you a way to manage your big data in a way that really works similar to a relational database, where you have transactions, you have isolation, you have all sorts of good things that maybe in the past have not been common in the big data community, although now it's becoming increasingly common. Databricks provides a bunch of machine learning specific features. So things like ML flow, lots of integrations with different like AI and ML libraries. Because one of the big use cases for big data is to train machine learning models. So
Yeah.
whether they are simple like predictors trying to do customer segmentation, or whether they are some really fancy generative AI stuff, all your machine learning AI needs big data, and Databricks is a great place to manage it for you. So there's probably more things I could go into, but this is more or less a high level what Databricks does for you. If you
Yeah, I
have
think it's a
big
good
data,
presentation.
we provide the whole toolkit, not just Spark. So we provide storage, we provide compute, we provide machine learning, we provide orchestration, we provide monitoring, and all sorts of things. Everything you need to make a big data platform work.
I see. Like, so it's all big data focus. Uh,
Yes,
and so, are you still like, is Databricks still mainly focused in Scala on the technical basis? Is it still the main like programming language at Databricks?
it's definitely the main programming language. It's not the only programming
Yeah.
language. So, for example, we have a lot of very high performance native code in C++ or Rust or whatever, just like the things that
Yeah.
you don't want to do in JVM, you need to maximize your vectorized computation. That all needs to be native. The front end is still in TypeScript, because that's where most of the community and ecosystem is. We have a lot of Python, whether for internal scripts, whether for PySpark. Our data scientists and customers love Python.
Yeah.
Um, we support R on Databricks. A lot of the machine learning stuff as well is in Python. Yeah, Databricks isn't very. We have a lot of Scala. We might be one of the bigger Scala companies around, but we're not particularly like dogmatic about it. We use languages where they make sense. Like it's always good to have fewer languages if you can share tooling and share expertise and have transferable knowledge and skill sets. But it's also good to have languages specialized for what you need to do.
Yeah, for
And if
sure.
you need to integrate with Nginx, you're going to be writing Lua. If you want to integrate with Kubernetes like operator frameworks, you may be writing Go. And we don't shy away from doing that. We probably still have the most Scala, but I think as a company grows and as we make acquisitions of other companies with their own tech stacks, it's definitely going to kind of bifurcate over time. Um,
Yeah, but what I mean is that like in terms of like the most of the backend work, When it makes sense, it's mostly written in Scala, and you're you know the, and you're okay. I mean, the company is okay with this. It's not moving away or anything. It's more like using the right language for each tool.
Yeah, I mean, there's always some discussion about whether or not we should move away. There's been that discussion for the last 10 years, maybe. So far, we are still all on Scala. Like I said, we are pragmatic. Like we don't have any particular dogmatism. It's not like we are loving the IO monads and actors and we're going to stay on Scala forever because of that. Like we use
Yeah,
Scala relatively pedestrian ways. Like we have web servers with HTTP or gRPC. Sometimes we may use Scala concurrent.future. That's about as sophisticated as we get Databricks. Both a good and a bad thing. It's good in that people don't have problems picking it up. Like there's no problem at all with people learning Scala when they join Databricks. You come join Databricks, day one, you read and write some Scala, you probably can figure it out. And there's no education, there's no special education, no special training program or boot camp. You don't need to learn what the monad is like some other companies have on their first day. You
yeah.
just come in, write code. And largely that has worked for us so far.
That makes sense. And I think it's really good to hear from this because I think many people, I mean, some companies complain that, yeah, it's a bit difficult to get someone onboarded or you need some training, but you don't necessarily need to. It's really depend on the way you use Scala. Like if you use like Scala from the standard library, or I guess the Li Haoyi ecosystem, it's not necessarily difficult to pick up. Like from someone who has some experience with programming in general, it's like sure,
Yeah.
it's like a bit functional oriented, but it's not like a massive difference.
I mean, nowadays, all the other languages are functional oriented too, right? Like you have TypeScript, which looks very similar to Scala. You have Python with pattern matching and data classes, and you have JVM with type inference and lambdas and Java streams and everything. Now they have records. So Scala's like, it's not that different. There are definitely pain points, but our pain points are often less about the language, but more about all the non-language things. Things like the compiler is still slow. Yes, it's 3 times faster than it was in Scala 2.13. It's still slower than the Go, Kotlin, or Java compiler, perhaps. The
Yeah.
tooling is still a bit flaky. IntelliJ is not as good as it is for Java, of course. Uh, the ecosystem is definitely smaller than a Java ecosystem. You can share some of it, but like the Scala specific stuff around linting, formatting, IDE, editor options. Yeah, so those are some of the pain points that we have with Scala. And for now, we are still here, but we can't speak for the future. Many things may happen.
One thing I also wanted to ask you is about teaching in Scala, because this is something you have done with you. You wrote a book called like a hands-on programming in Scala. So what
Yes.
motivated you to write this book in the first place? Because it's quite a big, big thing to do.
Yeah. So the basic thing is that you have all these nice libraries. Like people love whatever, like requests or Scala tags or I don't know, like OSLib or whatnot. And each of these libraries has tons of documentation. Like OSLib has this huge reference page, all the different functions, examples, cookbooks, same with the others. But it's not just individual libraries are cool, but the way they can combine these libraries is like extra cool. Like when I pick a language, I don't want to read and write files. I want to make HTTP JSON requests I store on the file system and then manipulate using third-party sub-processes, as an example. I
Mm-hmm.
want to create a web server with client server API and web HTML UI, maybe with like some kind of like push notification WebSocket connection. I want to make a distributed system application with multiple Scala processes interacting with each other over RPC with serialized data. So that's the thing where individually these libraries give you everything you need. Individually, these libraries docs tell you everything you need to know about each library. But who's going to tell you how to use these libraries to do cool things?
Mm-hmm.
Like you can come figure it out yourself, but why should everyone have to figure it out themselves where someone's figured it out before and can just tell people, yeah, this is how you wire up the JSON library with the HTTP library with the HTTP server with the file system library and use it to make your web server.
Yeah. So to
Um,
have a complete use
so that's
case.
so that's the motivation for this book where it doesn't just teach you Scala or teach you libraries, it teaches you to do useful things. And these are things that you could actually get the salary for. Like many of these projects are actually inspired by my work I did at Databricks. Like the book covers distributed file syncer, it covers programming language interpreter, it covers web server and API server, push and pull, and web and API. I've done all those things at Databricks with Scala. It works. So why shouldn't other people be able to do it? And that's what the motivation for this book.
And is it
Um,
focused on the Li Haoyi ecosystem, or is it like more like or Scala from the standard library, or a mix of both?
it's basically a standard library plus some of the Li Haoyi libraries,
Hmm.
and not because they are the only libraries available, but because for the purposes of a beginner, they're just the best. Like I don't want to have someone jump into Scala and to start learning about Clays-Lee option monad transformers. It's like, yeah, they want to scrape a website. They don't want to learn about Clays-Lee option monad transformers. So why should I force them to? There's some cases where libraries are from other parts. For example, I think the book uses JSoup, which is the Java library for managing HTML. Uses Quill, which is a database library from some other folks, not by part of the Li Haoyi ecosystem. So I picked the best the best libraries for beginners for each use case.
I see.
But it just happens that for the people who are really just starting, who really just want to get something done and don't want to learn like deep theory, the Li Haoyi libraries are generally the best for that.
So typically the audience for this book is for people who want to learn Scala, who are not necessarily Scala developers. Is it correct? Or?
Yeah, that's correct. I'm not trying to sell to anyone who already uses Scala happily using some other framework. Like if you love your actors, you love your monads, IO monads, that's great. You can keep using them. But if you're a Python developer who wants to go write some Scala because you heard it's good performance, good parallelism, static checking, good tooling, and like a whole zoo of nice properties, I don't want you to get turned off because you get confused by reactive actors. Like that's not the point. You want all the other things, and that's kind of persona that this book is for.
Yeah, I do think the Scala programming language, just out of the box, just a standard library, is already amazing. Like it's already very good, like very nice. Like when I started to use it the first time, I was very impressed by it. I mean, maybe as you said, like other languages have progressed in the meantime, and maybe the difference that there was at the time is more minor. But still, I think like the standard library and your libraries is a good way to pick up and be very productive immediately.
Yeah, and if you want to like graduate to more sophisticated tool sets later, you can, right? Like let's say you find that using blocking web servers and web clients is becoming too slow because I actually do have like 50,000 QPS I need to manage on a single box. Then sure, you can then go swap out your Li Haoyi web server, Li Haoyi request library for something more non-blocking, and move forward that way. But by that point, you probably already have a good time, and I'm not worried. It's only at the very start which people need the most help getting started with Scala.
Yeah, I think it's a bit like this when sometimes you want to start a new pet project and you think, okay, let's pick up a new programming language that I don't know, and then let's pick up a new editor that I don't know, and at the end you spend so much time like learning these new things that you don't actually work on your project. So I do think
Yeah,
it
that's
definitely
right.
makes sense to reduce like all this external complexity and focus on the project, and then once you have it working, it's easier to like pick up something new. Okay.
Yeah, I remember when I first started using Scala, I was trying to make like a photo sharing app with some kind of like push notifications. And here I was, this like second year college student, trying to learn about these like iteratives and enumerators and enumeratives and all sorts of like crazy things. I just want to show a notification on the website when someone uploads a photo. Like, why is it so hard? So that's the kind of thing that I don't want people to, like, the kind of experience I don't want people to have when they learn Scala. So
Yeah,
that's what this book tries to avoid.
I think you're right that the takeaway is that it's not like, monad and functional libraries or actors are not useful. I mean, I think they are, but you don't necessarily need them. Like, you should probably take this complexity when your project really requires it, I guess.
Mhm. Yeah.
And generally regarding the book, was it like, do you think like it was a commercial success? Are you happy about like, how many people like bought it, or did
I'm
you
quite
do it like for
happy.
more like was it more like you did it like because you wanted to share knowledge and it happens to make a bit of money, or was it like you wanted to go into the production of more books?
It was mostly to share knowledge. Like I work in big tech, and big tech pays like way more than you can make by any book typically, even if you're like the top of the market. So like you look at the dollars per hour, it's totally not worth it. But I guess it did sell. It's not the most popular Scala book either. Like people buy the standard programming in Scala by Martin Odersky way more than they buy hands-on Scala programming. It does make some money because I self-published. So I don't know how familiar you are with publishing, but you go with a standard publishing house, you get 5% of the gross revenue, maybe 10%. Whereas for the ones I publish online, I get something like 90% for the ebook and 40% for the physical books. And that's only because I splurged on like color printing for the physical books. I wanted them to be really pretty, even at the expense of cutting in my margins. So yeah, I mean, I probably sold a lot less, but in terms of how much money I end up making, it's probably quite comparable because other people are making $1 or $2 per book sold, and I'm making $10 to $20 to $30 just because I'm not paying some O'Reilly or something the margin to do all this publishing for me. On the other hand, it means I do have to do all the non-writing stuff myself. I had to run the editing process myself. So not just editing it myself, but finding editors, scheduling editors. Like I think I ended up having about 20 different editors who all read different parts, or reviewers who end up
Right.
reviewing different parts of the book, so I can incorporate their feedback. I had to render the book myself. The book actually has its own rendering pipeline that is discussed as part of the book in one of the chapters. If you want to go write your own like incremental parallel book renderer, you can. It's in chapter 10.
It's like you would
So all
create your
that
own
stuff,
LaTeX for publishing your book.
this was all done in Markdown,
Yeah.
HTML.
No, but
Yeah,
what I meant is that I
basically,
think like Donald Knuth wrote LaTeX in order to publish his book. So it's like
yeah,
you wrote your own like pipeline in order to do this.
yeah, yeah, similar. But I mean, if you love writing code, then writing a bit of extra code just for the heck of it is not a penalty, right? It's a bonus.
Yeah, and you can
Yeah, and sure,
customize
like
it
the
as you
code,
want. Like,
yeah, and even silly things, right? Like I made sure that every single chapter has exactly the same number of subsections, so the index page looks good. Like every chapter, every page is exactly nicely lined up. I can make sure that things are laid out horizontally and vertically perfectly. So when there's space, I can compact it like 2-column layout, 1-column layout. Yeah, all that kind of all done automatically by the pipeline. But yeah, so all that was definitely extra work, and that's I guess what you get from by not choosing a publishing company. But then the margins are also just what you get in exchange. And I think the end goal is just to get people to be writing Scala without kind of the baggage of these more advanced frameworks. Like, because I have colleagues. My last job at Dropbox, I wrote some Scala, and I try and introduce Scala people, and it's like, what on earth is this SVT actor? God knows what. I don't want all this. I just want to take some JSON, parse it, spit out some other JSON, and shove it into some HTTP endpoint. I don't want to learn all this stuff. And I think the same applies in many parts of the world, many places where people want to learn Scala. So even though this ecosystem is definitely still like less popular by many measures than the kind of FP ecosystem or the Akka reactive ecosystem, at least it's there. Like it's somewhere I can point people at. It's like, hey, yeah, you want to learn Scala? This is a good way to learn Scala, which I could not in good faith say before this. Like, I
yeah,
can't
yeah.
tell people that you want to learn Scala, go learn Akka and have fun. Like they're gonna suffer. I
No,
suffered when I started using Akka back in the day.
no, I 100% agree
Yeah.
with you. I think more people should use. I mean, not necessarily your ecosystem, but this design principle of choosing like simple Scala, essentially, like not necessarily pick up the most fancy stack or the thing that is popular at the moment, but really like focusing on the things that is simple, easy to understand, easy to read, that people can come from another programming language and pick it up. I think this should be one of the important points, and not to try to see like how clever you are, but the goal is to get things done.
Mhm.
And do you think you will? Do you have any other ideas of books you would like to write in the future, or are you for now you're set?
No, I don't have any plans. Someday
have you
maybe.
have you been burned out, or was it like a generally fun experience?
it was a good experience, but you need something you're sufficiently passionate about.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Like, you can't write a book for the sake of writing a book. You'll just do a lousy job and be miserable the whole time. You need something that you really want to share. You really
Yeah.
want to get out. That's like not just get out as in a blog post and post on Twitter, look, I'm said something, but actually structure in a way that you think people will find value. So it needs to be both like super passionate as well as super like targeted. And I'm not sure whether I have anything like that fits that criteria anytime soon.
Cool.
Yeah.
But anyway, if you are, like, I would be really interested to read. I mean, as I said, I love your technical writing, and I think many people are the same. So keep doing that, like, if you
Great.
can.
Thanks.
I also discovered recently that you have another hat, like you probably have so many at home, where you do, like, you work on the SIP committee for Scala. So I don't know if many people are
Yeah.
aware that the SIP process is like the Scala improvement process, where essentially it's how the language evolves. So can you
Yeah.
tell me a bit about this process, and what is your contribution to this?
Yeah. Basically, the SIP process is a way to try and get consensus for changes to a Scala language. So there are a bunch of people, a bunch of professors, a few industry folks, few independent folks. It's not meant to be like a comprehensive list of everyone who uses Scala, but just somewhat representative of the different kind of personas that are interested or would be interested in language changes. And what the SIP committee or process is about is debating, approving, or rejecting proposed language changes. So yeah, there's a bunch of them out right now. Like, people talking about how we can make for comprehensions less janky, how we can improve like pattern matching, how we can improve like multiple assignments. I myself have one about a better way of maintaining binary compatibility across like as when default arguments are added and as a program evolves. Um, I don't think any of the individual proposals are super interesting. What's interesting is that it seems that there is like there are proposals. It's not just like Martin Odersky's like bag of good ideas. It's actually by multiple people. They are written up reasonably well. They are reasonably thoroughly discussed. And that's something that I think the Scala community has never seen like in its whole like 10, 15-year existence, 20-year maybe existence. Like, in the past, Scala was pretty like ad hoc. You have some PhD student, yeah, this is great, let's put in the standard library. Or for Scala 2, like basically what has been frozen for almost a decade now. Like, when's the
Mhm.
last time a major language change landed in Scala? Like maybe Scala 2.10, which would be back in 2012, 2013 when I was in college.
Yeah, it's
That's
a
when
while ago.
macros were introduced. Since then, like 2.11, 2.12, 2.13, they've made changes, but kind of incremental changes, nothing really major. Um, so, and for Scala 3 was the initial rollout of Scala 3 was a complete mess. Like, super short time frames, all sorts of changes being pushed in, no review, crazy discussions, no change management plan, not much planning in general.
Mhm.
So, and you compare to other languages like the Python enhancement process, you actually feel pretty bad. Like, like those guys have their act together. Like, they actually have really thorough discussion of alternatives, really thorough discussion of implementation trade-offs, really thorough discussion of like what the consequences of the use cases and consequences of these changes would be. Not just like what the change is, but like, so what? So your pattern matching, what can you do with it? So you have the walrus operator. Why do we want it? Why does it make our code better? What are the concerns? Why do we think this is a good idea? So I think with the current batch of SIP proposals in Scala, we are finally getting to that point. And that's, I think, a good sign for the language, because
Yeah.
if we stop evolving, everyone's just going to catch up. And Scala was great like 10 years ago. By now, it's no longer so special. Like, everyone has structural pattern matching. Everyone has static types. JavaScript has a great type system. Uh, Java has type inference and lambdas and record classes, and I think they're getting sealed traits at some point, sealed interfaces. Basically, if Scala doesn't keep evolving and getting better and better, it's just going to die out. Like, great language in 2015, okay language in 2025, actually kind of shitty language by 2035, because everyone else has just gotten so much better and you're left behind.
Yeah, I
So
think like
even though I
Scala.
myself don't use,
Yeah, I was saying
yeah,
like
even though
Scala
I
being a.
myself don't use Scala very much, I think that it's super important that we keep the language improving. Because if you don't improve it now, I won't be able to use it next year. And if we don't improve it now, like in 10 years' time, the language is going to be dead. Like everyone else is going to be better, and Scala is just going to be a footnote in history.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, Scala being kind of a more niche language, you need to have like an edge over the other one. Otherwise, people will rather pick up a more mainstream language, I guess. So it definitely makes sense that there need to be an improvement process. And it's true that, I've heard many people complaining about the Scala 3 migration, like how the features, many features were added a bit at the last moment, as you said, without necessarily proper review. So at least it's good that now we can see that there is a more process in place and more proper review. So I think everyone wants to have something like a bit more formal, I guess.
Yeah, to be clear, I'm not opposed to the features being added in Scala 3. Like, for example, the indentation syntax. Like I came up with that back in like 2014. Like that was my idea, and I still think it's a great idea. The way it was added was a total mess. Like the change management, the discussions, all a disaster. But we need to do it, I think, like because this is one thing that provides actually quite a big edge in terms of like why do people like Python instead of Ruby, for example? Like they're almost the same language, right? Like you look at them, they use the same keywords, they have a similar stand libraries. I once converted a Python program to a Ruby program just by adding a bunch of end statements to every single function and became valid Ruby. But why did Python win? And it is to a large extent, I think, because of this really nice syntax. It's really lightweight, really good syntax that's great for students, great for whiteboard slides, great for prototyping. Uh, and like, yeah, Python has a whole bunch of like bad properties. Like its implementation is crazy, the performance sucks, multi-threading doesn't work well, all sorts of packaging is a mess, all sorts of things. But the syntax just makes such a big difference that it won over Ruby and over PHP and Perl and over all sorts of other languages that are functionally identical.
Yeah, I
So
think
even
for a
though the
language to be
Scala,
successful, you need to have lots of people joining all the time. Like, and I think we need to focus on the onboarding process. And as you said, like the syntax is a big part of this. Like, because I think
yeah,
if you're an
so
existing Scala developer, you don't care too much about the syntax. But for a person joining, it's an important part.
yeah, so for the white space syntax, I was very unhappy with the way it was rolled out, but I think it was necessary to roll it out. Like we need to keep moving the language forward, and this is one of the major ways where I think we move the language forward. Not perfectly, but 99, 95, 99% of the way there. Yeah.
And in terms of, so for this SIP process, like I think many people are not really aware of how it works. So how do you even get involved? Like how did you join this committee?
Uh, they reached out and I said, okay, basically every month there's a meeting at late at night for me. And we just talk about the proposals and vote on some of them.
Okay,
And
nice.
the point is to have some kind of structured way that things get into the Scala language, like rather than just like Martin Odersky like unilaterally committing things into the repo. I mean that might have worked in the past, but now like, we do want to get people involved and get people to review these proposals because the review and discussions do make them better. Like nobody has a perfect view of how
Of
things
course.
can and should be. And the people from academia, people from industry, people independently working on their own things, they all have different perspectives to bring to the table. And that you combine all that, and that's how you get good proposals that end up benefiting everyone rather than short-sighted proposals that benefit a small number. Um, so
And
yeah,
and
so
so
being on the committee, I think is by invitation, but anyone can submit a proposal. And it's not easy to submit a proposal, not because we put any roadblocks, but it actually is quite hard to write up a good, detailed proposal with why you're doing it, what you're proposing to do, how it can be done, how it would be implemented, what are the
Mhm.
trade-offs, what are the alternatives you considered, why you chose this over the alternatives, what are the consequences, what are the use cases, how it interacts with all the existing features. It's not easy, but I think this kind of thing is necessary if you want to evolve the language well. Yeah.
And I guess also it's like puts a certain barrier, like I mean, which it may be good. Like it's like for stuff you really care about, that you're gonna make the effort to write this. So you only do this for like things that advance the language in a significant way.
Yeah, I think when I look at this, the amount of effort needed to like add a language feature to a Scala language should not be less than the amount of effort put into an intern project at a big tech company. Right? You have a summer intern, right? They join our college. What do? Well, you need to write up a summer plan for them. You need all these things, and you want to make this intern successful. And if you're going to change the Scala language, you can at least put in that much effort.
Yeah, of
So
course.
yeah, it may take 5, 10, 20 to 25 pages maybe to really write that properly. But yeah, I mean, an intern joins you for summer, you're going to put in that effort to write up a project plan for the intern, I hope. Or if you're going to add a new public API endpoint for us to some like big, existing system, yeah, you write up a proposal with migration plans and change management and communication plans and all that. So I think it's honestly a bit laughable that we did not have this in the past in Scala, and it's good that we have it now, because this is what professional software engineering looks like. It's not just like anyone writing code and dumping it in the repo. It's actual rigorous discussion and rigorous consideration of trade-offs. And that's what the SIP process is trying to bring to the Scala language as it evolves.
Yeah, and I'm glad to hear that you said that the industry is also represented, because quite often in this sort of discussion, quite often it's more focused toward academics. So it's nice that there is like a different like group, different viewpoints, and this is where I think we arrive to great features. And you said for joining these committees by invitation, but for people who are interested to like track the proposal, track the discussions, where can we check this out?
There's a GitHub repository, Scala/improvement-proposals.
Okay.
And you look at the open pull request there, and you have the currently open proposals and all the discussion around them. Yeah.
Nice. And I think there is also
anyone is welcome to.
There is also the Scala Contributor
contribute.
forum that talks about this sort of things, or at least there's some discussion there as well.
Yes, no? It's typically cross-posted, so either place works.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
I mean, so sometimes people will cross-post it to Reddit, and you see Martin and Dursky answering questions on Reddit. Like basically, like if you find it wherever you find it, you can probably discuss it, and it's fine.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I think it's always difficult. I mean, the problem with a Scala Contributor forum or like a GitHub repository is that most people are not aware even that it exists, or you don't get a notification. So yeah, it's nice that at least you cross-post it, and the more people participate, the better, I think. Nice. Well, thank you very much, Li Haoyi. I really appreciated this discussion today. It was very informative. I learned a lot, and I definitely want to try Mill myself. Generally, I hate working with build tool, so I will give it a shot, and I'll let you know if you manage to change my mind.
Okay. Yeah, it's great chatting with you, Julian.
Yeah, thanks for coming. And for people who want to support this channel, please check out the description to see our sponsors, and see you for the next time. Bye.
Bye-bye.